Hey, welcome back to 65 Drums. My name's Justin. Today I'm going to be doing a deep dive review on the Yamaha DTX6K3X. We're going to talk about the pads, the module, do some playing examples, and talk about whether or not it's worth buying. Now, as many of you have already noticed, Yamaha has completely wiped the board. They no longer sell any electronic drums they were selling just a couple years ago. They completely stopped making the 400 series, the 502 series, the DTX700 series, and even their flagship 900 series, and are starting off from scratch. The first drum set line that came out to replace all their old stuff was the DTX402 line. It's like their very, very beginner line of electronic drums. This is the next tier above that. And I wouldn't be surprised if Yamaha was currently working on a new electronic drum line above this tier in like the $2,000 to $3,000 range, because that seems to be the direction that they're moving right now. Okay, so let's start off with the drum pads and then we'll move ahead to the drum module. So with the exception of the kick drum, all of these drum pads have been around since about 2011. That's when they first introduced this playing surface. It's their Yamaha DTX silicone pad material. It's like a really, really nice version of a practice pad. It feels great, and the main benefit is probably the fact that it's really, really quiet. Let's start off with the sizes of the drums. All the cymbals are about 13 inches across. The crashes, the ride, and even the hi-hats. All of them are 3 zones, except for the hi-hat, which is 2 zones, and all of them use 1 cable, except for the hi-hat. The hi-hat takes 2 cables, and it actually has the open and closed mechanism sensor built into the bottom of the hi-hat pad, instead of having a separate piece. As far as like cymbal quality, these are right there on par with the Roland cymbal lines. It's also nice that they decided to include the hi-hat stand in the box. This saves you about $80 or so because Roland and Alesis make you buy one separately. The snare drum is 8 inches across and has 3 dedicated zones. One zone is just for rim click, and it's on the opposite side of where you would hit the rim shot, and then the drum head zone. I believe this is all accomplished by having 1 piezo for the head zone and then 2 switches, one for the click and then one for the rim shot. Now, as far as mounting options, the snare has a ball mount, so you can precisely set it up exactly how you want at whatever angle. The tom pads, not so much. You basically can tilt them up and down, and that's about it. You could also do a 1-up, 2-down configuration if you wanted to, but you don't really have much twisting control over the pads. Now, one slightly subtle thing you might not notice at first if you're testing out this drum set in a noisy music store is the fact that each one of these DTX silicone tom pads and the snare pad all have a slightly different pitch. So when you're hitting them, even with the module turned off, they will sound different from each other. And the snare drum actually has a slightly different density, I believe. They can adjust this by how many air bubbles they have inside of the DTX silicone pad during the manufacturing process. These aren't exactly acoustic-like. You will be able to practice faster on these than you would with acoustic drum heads, but they do feel really nice. The snare and tom pads are really solid. I completely enjoy playing on them. But the problem is, the drum set costs $1,800, and drum sets of this price tier, they all have 12-inch snares, or if you're Alesis, they give you a 14-inch snare. And jumping down from a 14-inch snare to an 8-inch snare is very, very jarring. If you want to play acoustic and electronic, jumping back and forth a lot, you want to feel more at home, and a larger electronic drum set of playing sizes definitely helps with a smooth transition back and forth both ways. So an 8-inch snare ends up feeling more like a practice pad than an acoustic snare. And so that's why I feel like an 8-inch snare at this price bracket doesn't make that much sense. It feels like Yamaha is holding back a little bit. But if you do like compact electronic drums, then this may or may not matter to you. Okay, so the pads we've been talking about so far, they've been out for about like 10 years or so. They're battle tested. We all know that they're very tough. They last a long time. They're very high quality components. But the two pieces that are different about this drum set that we haven't seen before is the new drum rack and the new kick drum. So let's talk about the kick drum first. This is a surprisingly good kick drum. It's incredibly solid feeling. And that's surprising because when you first unbox it, it's deceivingly light. That's because the drum tower is made of plastic, and then the drum leg that's in front of it, it's a separate piece, and it's a completely single piece of metal that has industrial Velcro on the bottom of it. When you put these two pieces together, this thing does not move. And it also feels surprisingly acoustic-like. It's a multi-layered design. If you poke the kick drum, it actually indents really, really easily. It almost feels like I'm attaching my kick drum pedal to an exercise ball. It's got a great feel to it, has a certain level of rebound, and it doesn't feel like you would expect a rubber kick drum pad to, feel. One thing I want to mention about the kick drum pad is that you have to be very careful when centering up the kick drum beaters if you use a double kick drum pedal. It's definitely compatible with two beaters, but if you don't center it just right, the right and left beaters will have different volumes while you're playing. The other thing to mention is that you're gonna have to mess with the sensitivity dial on the back of the pad, and then of course the trigger curve settings and the rejection time settings inside of the module. And then finally, before we move ahead to the drum module, we have the drum rack. I'm not a fan of the way it looks. I don't like the long feet on the bottom. That was a style of like the early 2000s era of electronic drums. Everyone has moved away from it, but for some reason, Yamaha is right back here. But I love having the module on the right-hand side because I'm right-handed, and I've actually switched my conversion setup back there to be a module on the right side configuration as well. I just think it's very, very convenient. The only downside is that some headphones, like my Sennheiser HD 280 Pros, those have the wire coming out of the left ear cup. So the wire kind of crosses in front of you or behind your back when you're playing if the module's on the opposite side of the wire coming down from your headphones. Okay, so now it's time to move ahead to the Yamaha DTX Pro module. This is replacing the DTX 502 module that came before. And this is so much better in almost every single way imaginable. I think this is now on par with the TD17. Let's start off with the inputs and outputs. As you can see, it's not using a DB25 cable snake. You have individual cables that go to every single pad, and they're all very clearly labeled so you know what you're plugging in. There's an extra input right here, and there's also an extra input on the kick drum. And if you use cable splitters, you could take what would have been the rim zone of the toms and use those for more pads. And you might be able to do the same thing if you want to split off from the snare. You could plug in I think 14 pads all total if you used a lot of cable splitters. As far as the other connections, you have the headphone jack, you have the aux input as you'd expect. No Bluetooth, unfortunately. There's 5-pin MIDI right here. There's right and left outputs as you'd expect. A USB input right here for USB MIDI. Right and left audio channels over USB as well, which is a welcome addition. There's also an additional USB input right here for a thumb drive. This allows you to bring in one-shot samples, 40 samples per zone. You can technically bring in 120 samples to the snare pad by itself just for one kit. So that's an A, B, C, D layer of samples that go back 10 samples each for each one of those A, B, C, D layers. And once you brought those samples in, you can control them in all the classic ways that you would on a sample pad. This is the metronome or the click section of the module. You can make it just go through the headphones, just go through the master outs. To adjust this, you press click, settings, and then you turn it on. You can adjust the BPM right here, and you have a dedicated screen just to show you the BPM that you've selected already. And you have that little indicator light, so in case you have it routed wrong, you can see that it's still going. There's also a volume knob for the click right over here. It's not buried in a setting somewhere, it's right there. So if you press click and then volume, you have a whole mixer section here, which I think is genius. You can do like these, I guess, subdivisions of the click as well. And if you want, you can also have a voice counting for you.
1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4.
You can adjust the sound that you're hearing as well.
1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4.
For people that practice a lot, that's very, very useful. So inside of here, we have ambience, compression, and effect. These two are useful. This one is nice for demos and for playing around sometimes, but you're probably going to forget that it even exists within a month of playing this module. So the ambience It's basically the room mic. So 0 ambience is no room mics. Up to 50%, you have 100% room mics. And then past 50%, now you're hearing reverb on top of that. Now let's move ahead to compression. Compression is a very useful setting. Some modules leave it out and you can really tell. With this compression setting, you don't have to worry about attack and release times and milliseconds of this and that. All you gotta do is mess around with this little knob right here until you think it sounds good. And as you keep increasing it, the sound gets more aggressive, more punchy, more glued together. At 100%, it sounds really weird and I don't really recommend that, but just a little bit of extra compression does go a long way. And then finally, we have the effect knob. This is kind of useless for most people, but it does exist if you need it. To adjust what the effect is, you go over here to this button, press this button, and now you can cycle through everything. So as you can tell, it might be useful for some people, but for most people, they're not going to be messing around with this. That's just my guess. The only effect that I think I'll like to use in the future is probably the presence effect. You can stack effects as well. There's like a master effect and then 2 effects on top of that. Beyond this, you can make some really quick adjustments by pressing instrument, pressing down, and now you can tune and muffle your drums just by adjusting these values with this knob right here. Now, as far as muffling goes, I almost never touch it because these sounds don't really ring out that long. Like, they're not too short, but they're about right for me. And if I add muffling, it just gets too short way too fast. You can adjust the size, which is just tuning, and then the sustain again. I'm not going to dive into every single thing this can do because otherwise the video would be an hour long, but you have some things like master EQ, headphones EQ, you can adjust the trigger settings of the pads, you have the transient, the sweepable EQ for each individual pad. There's just a lot of things you can do inside of here. Not to the level of editing you'd get inside of the TD17, because Roland does some different interesting things with their modules to allow you to do those really deep editing things that you can do, but there is a sacrifice that happens when you get those extra editing parameters. I think that the module is great. It's on the class level of the TD17, the 2-box Drum 3, but it's also fairly simple if you don't want to dive into some of the more advanced settings. The kit modifier knobs, including the compression knob, I really like that. Another really useful thing about this drum module is that because Yamaha came out with a drum trigger the other year, you can make it work with Simmons mesh pads or Roland mesh pads. Most mesh pads on the market will work with this drum module. One of the people behind making this drum set actually already made a tutorial video that you can go check out if you want. Again, the only things I don't like about it is the fact that it doesn't have Bluetooth to connect to a cell phone, and the fact that some of the menus could be slightly tweaked, in my opinion. But as far as like overall polish and overall power of what the module is actually capable of, there's not many rough edges here. They put a lot of effort, a lot of time went into this module, and I think they have a solid product here. I should probably mention there's an official app that works with this module called Record and Share. It's a way for you to record drum covers really easily onto your cell phone, using the cameras on your cell phone, but an official audio feed coming straight from your drum module. So you can record drum covers for Instagram, for example, really easily without needing an audio interface and having to sync the audio and the video later in post. It also has a cool trick where if you bring in a song from your personal library on your phone, it can be analyzed and they can throw a click correctly on the BPM of that song so you can play more accurately and then remove the click in post. Now, the only downside of this app, as far as I can tell, is the fact that people have been having some issues with it and it doesn't have a great score rating either on Android or iOS, where people are complaining about it crashing or syncing issues, you know, the standard type of problems you get with some apps. But I mean, it's free, you can download it, see if it works for you, and it could save you some time or money. Now it's time to talk about who this might be for, because not every single person is best suited for every single kind of drum set, just like there is no one car that everybody on earth should go buy. I feel like this is a drum set that is best suited for somebody who wants a compact electronic drum set that's really portable, for people that want to have really high quality components that will last them for years and years, and then eventually still be in good enough condition for them to sell later on down the line. And also for people that need to have high quality sounds because they don't want to use a laptop with a VST inside of it. This checks off all those boxes. The only thing that really stops me from fully recommending this drum set, while I still definitely think it is high quality and worth considering, is the fact that it's so small. If you want an electronic drum set at this price, this is the smallest drum set money can buy. 7-inch tom pads, having an 8-inch snare. Those are really small sizes when you're almost at a $2,000 price point. However, if you actually do sit down and play it long term, you will enjoy it. It just kind of depends on whether or not you want a larger drum set or a more compact drum set. So if I were to buy this, I would immediately have to go buy a larger snare, then take the current snare and put it as like a 4th tom pad. They really hit it out of the park with the module. I love the kick drum, and overall the components are high quality as well. And that's my 2 cents about this drum set. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Keep an eye out because I will be doing a comparison between this drum set, the TD17K3X, and the baseline Elisa Strike. That video is coming out fairly soon, so check out the channel. I do have a 65 Drums Facebook group and a 65 Drums Discord channel. If you want to check those out, I'll leave those links down in the description below. Also a link to Patreon if you want to help support the channel. Have an amazing day. See you all in a few.